The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus was speaking to the crowds when his mother and his brothers appeared. They were standing outside and were anxious to have a word with him. But to the man who told him this, Jesus replied, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" And stretching out his hand towards his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Anyone who does the will of my Father in heaven, he is my brother and sister and mother." The Gospel of the Lord. Many people who read this text, they always feel that maybe Jesus was a bit rude to his mother and relatives, or that Jesus ignored them, or Jesus was despising them. And it sounds like that, that they want to talk to him, and he says, "Who are my parents? Who is my mother? Who is my brother?" And then he stretches his hands and says, "These are my parents, this is my mother, these are my brothers and sisters, those who do the will of my Father." Does that mean that he rejected Mary, or that he ignored Mary, that he ignored his own brothers and sisters? And I think the answer is no. It's not that he said, "These are no longer my brothers and my sisters and my mother, now this is my new family." He does not say that. Instead, he makes his family wider. It's not only limited to his biological parents and brothers and sisters, but all those who do the will of his Father are now members of his family. And of course, Mary is one of the greatest who did the will of the Father, so Mary is included in that as well. And any of his brothers, if they did the will of the Father, then they are also included in that new family, the family of God, the family that brings us into a closer relationship with Jesus. So it is a happy occasion also for us to think about that we are also all members of God's family now by virtue of our baptism, and trying every day to do the will of the Father, to obey his ways and doing all that pleases him. So it's not like Jesus is despising or disobeying his mother, or despising or ignoring her. No, he's actually expanding and opening the family wide, opening his arms wider to be able to include and put all of us who do the will of the Father into that family. And this is what we are called to do. This is what is a biological family, but also the spiritual family to which we belong. We are not really biological brothers and sisters of Jesus, but by virtue of our baptism and by our virtue of trying to follow his ways every day, then we are also included in the family of Jesus. Jesus does not call us slaves or just disciples. He calls us friends. He calls us his brothers and his sisters. He calls us his mothers, because we do the will of the one who sent him. So my dear brothers and sisters, Jesus has invited us to this, and he has included us in his family, and we have to maintain that stature of being members of the family of Jesus by trying to do the will of the Father at all times, and not deviating from it, and not letting sin to be able to take us from that family, because that is what can only take us from the family of Jesus when we begin to do our own will, when we become proud, because being proud is trying to do what pleases me. I want to be the center of everything. I want to be in control and everything. And this is the only thing that can take us away from God's family, because we try to do our own will. And that's why Jesus said, if you have to be a follower of mine, in other words, if you have to be a member of my family, you must deny yourself, you must pick up your cross and follow me. Denying yourself means that we surrender now our wills to God's will. It's no longer about what we want, but it's about doing the will of the Father, doing the will of God in my life, not just doing what I want to do, not just trying to satisfy my own desires, but what does God want in my situation? What does God want of my life? In this situation that I find myself, what is the will of God in that? So it's about what does God want, not just what I want. And that's why we go into prayer, because we want to discern and know the will of the Father, the will of God, not just our will. And this is where it challenges us, because most of the time it's about what I want, how I want it to be, how I want it to be done, and what I want to have and what I do not want to have. It's always about I. And Jesus says, no, if we have to belong to his family, then we must submit to the will of the Father. Remember, he was one of those. He did this. He teaches by doing. Remember at the Garden of Gethsemane in Mark's Gospel chapter 14, where he says that, Father, if this cup can be taken away from me, that is the humanity of Jesus, but let it be your will. Let it not be my will, but your will. So it's not just about what I want, which means to take away this cup that I'm about to carry, the cross that I am about to carry, but let it not be my will, but your will. And at times we find ourselves in such situation, being hit from every side by our own will and what God wants from us. And how are we going to deal with that? Now, Jesus in this gospel therefore says, you become my brother, you become my sister, you become my mother, if you do the will of the Father, not just your will. And therefore, my mother is included in that as well. Mary is included in that, because Mary gave up her own will when she said, how can I be? How can this happen if I do not know a man? And he says, I am the handmaid of the Lord. Let it be done to me as you have said, not as I want. So Mary becomes the first mother of Jesus. She's the mother of Jesus, biological and spiritual. She's included in all of that because she accepted the will of the Father, the will of God for her. Therefore, she becomes the greatest, if you want, the exemplar of all mothers. So she's included in that family, but also all of us, by trying and willing to do the will of the Father at all times. So my dear brothers and sisters, it's not an easy thing, but we need the grace of God to be able to do this. To know that it is not about what we want, but it's about the will of God. So therefore, let us ask for that special grace to be able to choose God at all times over ourselves, over the world, over the other things that surround us, that we may be able to choose God at all times.